All right, so get this. The U.S. buying Greenland.
Oh, wow.
Sounds crazy, right?
It does sound a little out there. Yeah, like something out of a movie or something.
Totally.
Yeah.
But it's been a hot topic lately, and we're going to do a deep dive into it today.
It has come up a few times through our history, actually.
It has. And you know what's funny is like the Louisiana Purchase,
Right.
that was what, $371 million in today's money
Wow.
for a huge chunk of land.
Right.
And then you've got Alaska, which was like a steal, $129 million.
Wow, what a deal.
Can you imagine trying to buy land like that in today's market?
No way.
No way. So this time we're talking about Greenland.
That's right.
And this deep dive isn't about like, us picking a side or anything.
Right.
This is about exploring it.
Absolutely. Just looking at all the angles and the different perspectives.
Yeah, so we've got research, we've got reports. We can look at it from the Greenlandic perspective.
Okay.
The logistical and economic hurdles.
Right.
And then, of course, the geopolitical and, implications.
Of course. Yeah, that's a big one, especially with Russia.
Huge. So let's start with Greenland.
Okay.
It's not just about like buying a piece of land.
No.
It's about the people who live there.
Exactly. It's about the people who actually call Greenland home.
So what do Greenlanders actually think about this whole thing?
Well, that's a great question. And, they already have some significant autonomy from Denmark.
You okay?
Back in 2008, 76% of Greenlanders voted for self-government.
Wow, it's a strong majority.
Yeah, they really wanted to have more control over their own affairs. And get this, recent polls show that about 2/3 of Greenlanders actually want full independence.
Wow. So they're already kind of looking to go their own way.
Yeah, it seems like they're ready to chart their own course.
But would they want to be a part of the U.S.?
That's the multi-billion-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
And the polls actually paint a pretty complex picture.
Okay. On
one hand, you have 69% of Greenlanders supporting closer ties with the U.S. But then in another poll from the same year, you have 68% wanting closer ties with Denmark.
So it's like they like us.
Yeah.
But they're not ready to like ditch their current relationship.
Exactly. It's a balancing act.
Yeah.
They're trying to figure out what's best for them.
It's like they're playing the field.
Yeah, kind of.
Not looking for a serious commitment.
Exactly.
Okay, well, and we also have to, think about the cultural differences.
Absolutely.
Greenland has a very unique culture rooted in Inuit traditions.
That's right. And right now, there are only 39 Americans living in all of Greenland.
39.
39. That's it.
That's like a small, apartment building.
Yeah, it's tiny.
Wow. Okay, so no wonder there's some cultural differences.
Yeah, it's a different world up there.
So public opinion seems mixed.
Yeah.
The cultural ties are thin.
Uh-huh.
Where does Greenland's leadership stand on all of this?
Well, Greenland's Prime Minister, Mute Ijid, he seems to favor cooperation with the U.S.
Okay.
But he's made it clear that he's not interested in changing Greenland's sovereignty.
So he's more for like a partnership, not like a takeover.
Exactly. He wants to work together, but not be absorbed.
Okay. And it's also worth pointing out that most of the political parties in Greenland's parliament actually support full independence from Denmark.
That's right.
So Denmark doesn't really have the final say here either.
No, they don't.
Okay. So this brings us to, I guess, the next hurdle.
Yeah.
Let's say Greenlanders were open to this idea.
Okay.
How would governing Greenland actually work?
That's a big question, right?
Yeah.
It's not just about planting a flag and saying, okay, this is ours now.
Right. Would it become a state?
Yeah.
Would it be a territory like Puerto Rico?
Exactly. There are a lot of different possibilities. Becoming a U.S. territory like Puerto Rico or Guam, that's one option.
Okay.
But would Greenlanders actually be happy with that? And would the U.S. even want that?
Yeah, that's true. Because, look at Puerto Rico.
Exactly.
Most Americans support statehood for Puerto Rico.
Right.
And it still hasn't happened.
Still hasn't happened.
Echo.
It's a complicated process.
It's not a simple process.
No, it's not.
And then, some proponents have floated this idea of Greenland as like a hub for innovation,
Oh, yeah, I've heard about this.
where it operates outside of typical U.S. regulations, almost like a charter city.
Like a special economic zone?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's an interesting idea. It's been tried in Honduras, actually.
Oh, really?
Yeah, with kind of mixed results.
Okay.
One, Project Prospera. It's actually attracting investment and residents.
Okay.
But another one, ZEDE Morazon, that was actually shut down by the Honduran government.
Oh, wow.
So it raises the question, if this is such a great idea, why hasn't it worked perfectly everywhere else?
Yeah, it's like those miracle products you see advertised. that promise to solve all your problems.
I know exactly what you mean.
And then they just end up in the drawer.
Exactly. The reality doesn't always live up to the hype.
Right. And then there's also just the economic realities of Greenland,
Oh, yeah, let's talk about that.
which are pretty unique.
Definitely.
The Arctic isn't exactly known for its booming economy.
No, not really.
So what are some of the specific challenges that Greenland faces?
Well, there's what we call the first mover problem.
Okay.
Would companies actually be willing to relocate to such a remote and harsh environment?
Yeah,
It's a big risk, and there's no guarantee of return.
that's true. And what about the risk of, like, expropriation?
Well, that's a good point.
What if a future U.S. administration or even Greenland's own government down the line,
Right.
decides to reverse any agreements that were made during the purchase?
Yeah, that's a real concern.
I mean, that would be a disaster for investors.
Absolutely. Any promises made today aren't necessarily guarantees for tomorrow.
Right. Things could change.
Exactly.
Okay, so we got political hurdles, we've got cultural hurdles.
Yeah,
The economic landscape is, far from a sure bet.
it's definitely risky.
What about Greenland's existing ties with other countries?
Oh, yeah, that adds another layer of complexity.
How would those be affected?
Well, for example, there's the Jones Act. That's a U.S. law that requires all maritime trade between U.S. ports to be on U.S.-built, owned, crewed, and registered ships.
Oh, wow.
That could be a major problem for Greenland. This act alone cost Puerto Rico an estimated $1.4 billion annually.
Wow.
So imagine what it could do to Greenland's economy.
Yeah. Okay.
It's a significant hurdle.
And also remember something in our research about icebreakers.
Oh, yes. Greenland, because of its location, requires a strong icebreaker fleet.
Right.
And guess what? The U.S. has struggled to produce them.
Oh, great.
Yeah, it's a problem. And then there's Greenland's current relationship with the EU.
Okay.
They get free movement for citizens, they get financial support, they have favorable trade deals. All of that could disappear if they join the U.S.
Wow. So it really does feel like, this purchase would come with a lot of strings attached
It would be a complicated arrangement.
and a hefty price tag.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Denmark currently subsidizes Greenland's government budget to the tune of $591 million every year.
Wow.
Would the U.S. be willing to pick up that tab?
Yeah, and let's not forget about the social issues that Greenland faces.
That's right.
Unemployment, suicide, alcoholism. Those would become America's problems too.
Absolutely. We can't ignore those issues.
So it's not just about, signing a check
No,
and calling it a day.
it's much more complex than that.
But let's be real here.
Okay.
A big driver behind this whole purchase idea
Yeah.
is Greenland's vast mineral resources.
Oh, there's absolutely. Greenland is sitting on a potential gold mine of rare earth minerals.
Right, which are crucial for, like, clean energy, electric vehicles, all that good
Oh,
stuff.
all the valuable tech. Yeah.
So it sounds like the ultimate buy low, sell high opportunity.
It does, doesn't it?
Right.
But there's always a catch.
There's always a catch.
Greenland has actually prioritized environmental protection over exploiting those resources.
Really?
They've banned uranium mining and new oil and gas exploration.
So it's like buying a treasure chest, but not having the key?
Exactly. A bit of a paradox, isn't it?
Yeah, if the U.S. can't access these resources, does buying Greenland even make sense?
That's a great question and one we need to explore further. But before we wrap up this part of our discussion, we need to consider the geopolitical implications, especially when it comes to Russia.
Okay, so this is where things get a little frosty.
Yeah, a little bit.
We're talking about the Arctic, right?
The Arctic, a region that's becoming more and more accessible and more strategically important
Exactly.
every single day.
And the U.S. already has a military presence in Greenland.
That's right, the Thule Air Base.
But acquiring the whole island would put the U.S. right on Russia's doorstep.
Right next door.
I'm guessing Russia wouldn't exactly be thrilled about that.
I think it's safe to say they wouldn't be throwing a welcome party.
Yeah, probably not.
A U.S. acquisition of Greenland would be a major power play in a region where Russia already sees itself as the dominant force.
And what about China? I mean, they've been showing more and more interest in the Arctic lately.
That's a great point. China's been very active pursuing their Arctic ambitions, investing in infrastructure resources, and strengthening their diplomatic ties with those nations.
So this wouldn't just be like a U.S.-Denmark thing or even a U.S.-Russia thing.
No, this could potentially draw in other major players.
Yeah, it could create a whole new dynamic in the Arctic.
Exactly, a scramble for resources and influence leading to increased tensions and, who knows, maybe even military buildups.
It's starting to sound like a giant game of Risk, but with real-world consequences.
That's a great analogy. The stakes are incredibly high.
Yeah. And we have to at least consider the potential for like unintended consequences.
Absolutely. Actions have ripple effects, especially in a region as interconnected and strategically important as the Arctic.
We've talked about the political and geopolitical implications.
Yes.
But what about the impact on Greenland itself?
Oh, that's a crucial point.
We talked about cultural and economic aspects, but what about the environmental implications?
Well, Greenland is on the front lines of climate change.
Yeah.
The melting ice sheet is a stark reminder of the global crisis that we're facing.
And a U.S. acquisition could significantly alter how those environmental challenges are managed.
Absolutely. It's a double-edged sword.
Right.
On the one hand, the U.S. might bring more resources and technological expertise to bear on climate research and mitigation efforts.
Okay.
But on the other hand,
There's the potential for increased resource extraction driven by the desire to get at those valuable minerals we talked about.
right,
And that could actually exacerbate the environmental damage and accelerate climate change.
it's a classic dilemma.
It is.
Short-term gains versus long-term sustainability.
Exactly.
And in this case, the stakes are incredibly high.
They are.
Not just for Greenland, but for the entire planet.
For everyone.
Greenland's ice sheet plays a critical role in regulating global climate patterns.
It does.
And the melting contributes to rising sea levels.
Which threaten coastal communities all over the world.
So any decision about Greenland's future has to factor in the potential environmental impact.
Absolutely.
It's not just about the economic benefits.
So it's about the bigger picture.
Well, the strategic benefits. Exactly. We need to think long term. It really does make you think, huh, could a deal like this even happen in today's world?
It's tough to imagine. The world's such a different place now. The political climate, the level of scrutiny, the media attention, it'd be a whole different ballgame.
You're right. And we haven't even considered the global implications. Think about Russia's reaction, for example.
Yeah, we touched on that a bit earlier, but something tells me Putin wouldn't be too happy about the U.S. setting up shop right next door.
Yeah, to put it mildly, a U.S. acquisition of Greenland would be a major power move in a region where Russia sees itself as a major player.
And what about China? They've been increasingly interested in the Arctic lately. Would they just sit back and watch the U.S. expand its influence?
That's a great question. And, China has been actively pursuing its Arctic ambitions. They've been investing in infrastructure and resources and strengthening diplomatic ties with those nations.
So this wouldn't just be like a U.S.-Denmark thing or even a U.S.-Russia thing.
Right, it could potentially draw in other major players.
It could create a whole new dynamic in the Arctic.
Exactly. A scramble for resources and influence could lead to increased tensions and, who knows, maybe even military buildups.
It's starting to sound like a giant game of Risk, but with like real-world consequences.
That's a good analogy. The stakes are high.
Yeah, and we have to consider the potential for unintended consequences.
Absolutely. Actions have ripple effects, especially in a region as interconnected and strategically important as the Arctic.
We've talked about the political and geopolitical stuff.
Yeah.
What about the impact on Greenland itself?
Oh, that's crucial.
We've discussed the cultural and economic aspects, but what about the environmental side of things?
Well, Greenland's on the front lines of climate change. The melting ice sheet. It's a pretty stark reminder of the crisis we're facing.
And a U.S. acquisition could really change how those environmental challenges are handled.
Absolutely. It's like a double-edged sword.
Right.
On one hand, the U.S. might bring more resources and tech expertise to climate research and those mitigation efforts in Greenland.
Okay, but on the other hand,
There's a chance of increased resource extraction driven by the desire to access those minerals we talked about.
right.
And that could actually make the environmental damage worse and accelerate climate change.
It's like that classic dilemma, short-term gains versus long-term sustainability.
Exactly.
And in this case, the stakes are really high.
They are.
Not just for Greenland, but for everyone.
The whole planet.
Greenland's ice sheet plays such a critical role in regulating global climate patterns.
It does.
And the melting contributes to rising sea levels.
Which, of course, threaten coastal communities everywhere.
So any decision about Greenland's future has to factor in that potential environmental impact.
It has to be part of the conversation.
It's not just about the economic or strategic benefits.
No, it's about the bigger picture,
All right.
the long-term consequences.
Okay, so we've laid out the complexities,
Mm-hmm.
the potential upsides and downsides.
Yeah.
But let's take a step back for a second and think about a different scenario.
Yeah.
What if, instead of buying Greenland outright, the U.S. just focused on strengthening the partnership they already have?
That's an interesting idea. The U.S. already has a military presence there with Thule Air Base.
Right.
Could that be expanded? Could we collaborate more on scientific research, economic development, and climate change things?
What about investing in things like education and infrastructure? helping Greenland develop its own resources and build a more sustainable economy.
Those are all possibilities worth exploring. It's a more nuanced approach, but it could lead to a more mutually beneficial relationship.
And it could address some of those concerns we talked about, cultural sensitivity, economic viability, and environmental responsibility.
Exactly. It's not a quick solution, but it could be a more sustainable path.
It feels like there's a lot more to this story than just buying Greenland. It's about navigating the complex world of geopolitics, economics, and environmental responsibility in a world that's constantly changing.
You're absolutely right. The Arctic is so important on a global level, and cooperation, not conflict, is the key to a stable and prosperous future for everyone.
So as we get into the final part of our deep dive, I hope you're left with more than just facts and figures.
Me too.
I hope you get a sense of just how complex this is, the potential and the challenges that come with thinking about the future of the Arctic and the role of the U.S. in the world.
It's about looking at the big picture,
Exactly.
understanding the nuances, and engaging in these important conversations about the future we want to create.
Speaking of the future, let's shift gears a bit and try to imagine what a U.S. acquisition of Greenland might actually look like. Let's say everything falls into place. Greenlanders vote overwhelmingly in favor of it. Denmark gives the green light, and the international community is on board. What happens next?
Well, that's when the real work begins. Integrating a territory as massive and unique as Greenland would be a huge undertaking, unlike anything the U.S. has tried recently.
It'd be a massive project with challenges at every turn.
Yeah.
Where do you even start?
It would need a comprehensive plan, a roadmap addressing everything from governance and infrastructure to economic development and how to integrate socially.
It's almost like launching a giant startup, but on a geopolitical scale.
Yeah.
And like any startup, there would be growing pains, unexpected problems, and a lot to learn.
Exactly. And the stakes would be so high. Success would require collaboration, innovation, and a willingness to adapt to new situations.
It would also require a deep understanding of Greenland's unique history, culture, and its needs.
You can't just apply a one-size-fits-all approach. We need to build trust, foster mutual respect, and create a partnership that benefits both Greenland and the U.S.
It's a tall order. But even with all the challenges, there's a sense of possibility, isn't there?
Oh, absolutely. Imagine a Greenland that thrives as a hub for innovation, a leader in renewable energy, a model for sustainable development, a Greenland that preserves its culture while embracing the opportunities of the 21st century.
It's a compelling vision.
Yeah.
But as we've seen, the path to get there is full of obstacles.
Very true. And we have to remember that any vision of the future is just that, a vision. The reality could be different.
So as we move into the final part of our deep dive, let's explore some of those potential pathways, the unexpected bumps in the road, and that ultimate question. Is this a vision of the future we want to pursue? It makes you think about what kind of future we want. What role should the U.S. play in the 21st century?
Yeah, and is buying Greenland really the way to achieve those goals? I mean, that's the big question, right?
It is.
Yep.
And as we've seen, there's no easy answer.
No simple solutions here.
We've got the potential benefits,
Right.
the risks, and then a whole bunch of unknowns.
Exactly. It's complicated.
It's a decision with huge implications.
Huge for the U.S. and Greenland, obviously, but for the whole Arctic region,
Yeah, and maybe even the global balance of power.
it's a big deal.
So how do we even start to figure this out?
I think it starts with recognizing that this isn't just like a business deal.
Right, it's not just buying a piece of property.
Exactly. It's about people's lives, cultures, the future of a whole region.
We have to think about what Greenlanders want.
Right. Their desire for self-determination, their cultural heritage.
And we can't ignore how strategically important the Arctic is.
Absolutely. It's becoming more and more accessible, and the competition's heating up.
But it's not just about geopolitics.
No.
We have to be honest about what the U.S. can actually handle.
Can we actually govern and develop a place as big and challenging as Greenland?
Do we have the resources, the expertise, the political will to make this work?
That's a big question.
And are we ready for the cost? I mean, Denmark's spending $591 million a year to subsidize Greenland.
Quite a lot of money.
And what about the social problems in Greenland?
Yeah, we can't ignore those unemployment, suicide, alcoholism.
Those become our problems too.
Exactly. We can't just assume they'll disappear.
And then there's the whole issue of the environment.
Big one.
Can we develop the economy while protecting Greenland's ecosystem?
Right. Can we balance those needs?
And what about climate change?
Greenland is ground zero for that crisis.
Their ice sheet is so important for the global climate.
It really is.
We need to ask what happens if the U.S. takes over.
What impact will that have?
Will the ice sheet melt even faster?
Good question.
Will there be more mining and drilling, even if it hurts the environment?
These are tough questions,
Yeah.
really tough, and there are no easy answers.
But we can't just ignore them.
Absolutely not.
So we've talked about how complex this is,
Yeah.
the good and the bad.
Right.
But what if we imagine something different?
Yeah, okay.
What if instead of buying Greenland, the U.S. just focused on being a better partner?
Interesting. What do you mean?
We already have a military base there.
Thwal Air Base, right?
Could we make it bigger? Could we work together more on research, economic development, climate change?
All good areas for collaboration.
What about investing in education and infrastructure?
Yeah, helping Greenland build its own economy in a sustainable way.
Those are all options.
Definitely worth considering.
It's a more subtle approach,
It is, but it could be better for both sides.
and it might address some of the concerns we've talked about.
The cultural differences, the economic challenges, the environmental risks.
It's not a quick solution,
No, it's a long game.
but it might be the best way forward.
It could be.
This whole thing is about more than just buying a country.
It really is.
It's about figuring out how to deal with geopolitics, economics, and the environment in a world that's changing faster than ever.
It's about the big picture.
And the Arctic is a major part of that.
A global player, for sure.
We need to work together, not fight.
Cooperation is key.
That's how we can build a future that's good for everyone.
A future that's stable and prosperous.
So as we finish up this deep dive,
Yeah.
I hope you've learned something new.
Me too.
I hope you see how complex this is.
It's a tangled web.
And I hope you'll keep thinking about the Arctic
It's a fascinating region.
and what role the U.S. should play in the world.
What kind of future do we want?
It's about more than just facts and figures.
It's about understanding the big picture
It's about possibilities and challenges.
and making informed decisions.
So keep learning.
Yeah, stay curious.
Keep asking questions.
Don't be afraid to challenge the status quo.
And let's talk about the future we want to build.
Absolutely. Let's have those conversations.
Because ultimately, this is about all of us.
We're all connected.
What we do affects everyone.
Our choices matter.
So let's keep learning and exploring.
Let's work together to create a future that's both prosperous and sustainable
For everywhere.
for the whole planet.